For TigerDetails.com, Jerit Roser here with Mark Passwaters of AggieYell of the Rivals Network, the Texas A&M site, getting ready for what has become an increasingly interesting matchup in recent years between LSU and Texas A&M. And Mark, I guess, first of all, happy Thanksgiving week and hope everything's going well. How are y'all doing right now?
Well, we're doing all right. Just trying to actually see some football for a change after being on hiatus for 2 weeks, which for A&M sucked because they're playing their best football of the year. But, outside of that, everything's good. Families avoided COVID and all that jazz. So happy Thanksgiving back to you.
Appreciate it, man. And definitely want to get into some of the specifics of this matchup and also just kind of the season A&M's having overall, because it has been a really strong campaign up to number 5 in the AP rankings and the college football playoff rankings that were just newly released. But just getting back to the field, you mentioned LSU finally got back after a long break this past week and was able to steal one up at Arkansas and even its record back up to 3-3. How are the Aggies doing? What's been kind of the vibe from them as they had to miss a couple of weeks, as you mentioned, at a time that they're playing some of their best ball in a while?
Annoyance would probably be the best term. I mean, this is ridiculous, basically. A&M had 2 positive tests, but they were on both sides of the ball. One was in the quarterback room, one was in the secondary. And because of contact tracing, it wiped out the entire units. So they couldn't play. And it's ridiculous because the players themselves, outside of the 2 positive cases, nobody got sick. So it was a complete and utter waste of time. But that's the world we live in this year. And, they've got to reschedule Tennessee and Ole Miss. And obviously LSU knows that there's going to be some juggling in the schedule down the stretch. So basically, the only game that is certain to this point for A&M is LSU Saturday. And then they're going to have to hurry up and wait to find out when they'll play Auburn, when they'll play Tennessee, and when they'll play Ole Miss. So, basically you got a bunch of guys who are sitting there playing their best football, like you said, coming off a 48-3 demolition of South Carolina. And then all of a sudden, you can't play football. So they're annoyed. I think that there's certainly an element of concern about knocking off the rust, which is something that you guys understand. But on the other hand, there's that element of revenge. 50-7 doesn't sit well, just like 74-72 didn't sit well. Yeah. And so they've got to get everything back together. And I think that if the rust gets knocked off, they feel pretty good about how they're playing.
I mentioned with this matchup a couple of years ago that it had seemed like one that the SEC tried to push as a bigger rivalry than it felt like it was for a while. And despite the fact that there were a lot of reasons that it presented itself to be such a rivalry, but that 7 overtime game was really kind of lit the match and put all that kindling ablaze. What's from the other side of things out there in Texas, what has been the energy and the attitude about this matchup through the years? I mean, there were some really good Aggies teams that fell short to LSU, and then they finally get on the right side in that crazy one that I don't think anyone's going to forget ever, certainly not anytime soon.
Well, this goes back way before you and I. It used to be back in the 80s and 90s, A&M and LSU played every year, even if they weren't in the same conference. And then the series ended. A&M feels like LSU still owes them money. And you'll hear that from old Aggs. They were like, well, if they want any favors, they need to pay us back and all this. So the hate is definitely there, going way beyond A&M joining the SEC. But if you take a look at more modern times, LSU has played spoiler for the Aggies. In 2012, they came into Kyle Field and squeaked away with a win. And that basically cost A&M a shot at the national championship, as it turned out, because Johnny Manziel and company would go into Tuscaloosa and beat Alabama. But the very early loss to Florida week 1, and then the loss to LSU, games that were both extremely close, ended up leaving them out of the national championship hunt. And then you go to 2014, where the officials screwed A&M on a call late in the game when the Aggies were rallying, missed an offsides call that ended up with an interception from Kyle Allen. At that point, the rivalry was heated, at least on one side. Now, LSU, on the other hand, was just absolutely drubbing A&M every time they went to Baton Rouge. And that didn't change last year. You look at it, 74-72 woke up the other side because LSU fans thought that game was won. It was won in regulation, all that. A&M got an extra shot, took advantage of it. And then, of course, the insanity that was 7 overtimes. And by the end of that, I learned to absolutely hate the LSU band because I was in the end zone and they were playing behind me for 2 hours as we were standing there. We went down with about 4 minutes to go, and 4 minutes ended up becoming, an eternity. It was like a presidential administration. It was so long. But, you look at that, you hear that over and over and over. It's just like, shut up. Yeah, when the game actually ended, I was more relieved than excited because it's just like, they're not going to be playing in my ear anymore. This is great. We can go inside. But I think that game actually lit the fuse for LSU. And certainly they took it out on the Aggies last year. Basically, they needed that game for the CFP, but on the other hand, they really wanted to kick A&M's butt. And they did. And now I think the shoe is on the other foot. A&M's the more experienced team. They're the veterans. They want payback. Even though Jimbo Fisher says, no, revenge is bad. It clouds your mind. He can talk like Yoda. They're thinking like Darth Vader. They want payback. And that's great. That's a rivalry. That's what you want. And if A&M's not going to play Texas, LSU certainly fills the role of, from an Aggies perspective, villain. And I'm sure that A&M fans hope the same thing, with respect to the Aggies and LSU.
Yeah, last year around the LSU program, as much as there was that attempt to say the right things and kind of quell some of that rivalry or animosity or whatever from the previous year, it slipped out its fair share of times. As you mentioned, you can kind of feel it over on the other side this year. And I know it's interesting because the LSU players this year, despite having had that handy victory last year, they're over here having this rough year and talking about how they want to play spoiler now to an A&M team that is back in the college football playoff picture. As you, I guess, start to look at this matchup and some areas that you feel that confident about A&M and what's gone so well this season versus some areas where an LSU team that has struggled a lot of this season still kind of concerns you, what are some of the key areas that start to pop up?
Well, I think that this game comes down to the classic SEC style. Even though we're talking about two teams that are going to operate largely out of the spread, they've got good wide receivers. Obviously, Terrace Marshall is a step above everyone else on both teams. But this game is still going to be run the ball, stop the run. A&M has controlled the line of scrimmage for the past month. The offensive line has done a fantastic job, way beyond any expectations. And you take a look, starting in the Florida game, there has been a drive where A&M's offensive line has basically said, nope, you're done. We're taking over. It was the first possession of the second half in the Florida game. It was the second or third possession of the Mississippi State game from the first quarter into the second. The Arkansas game, it was in the first quarter. And then with South Carolina, basically from the start of the second quarter on, they just smashed them. It wasn't even close. And I think that that's what A&M wants to do. Obviously, LSU's coming off a game where they had a very good showing against the run. The concern, of course, is still the pass. 125th in the nation. And A&M's got some guys that don't get a whole lot of attention. Chase Lane being one of them. Anias Smith is a guy that people are going to have to learn because he's the closest thing the SEC's seen to Percy Harvin in a long time. This is a guy who's second in rushing for the Aggies behind Isaiah Spiller. He's also first in receiving, only by 1 yard. There are two guys at 311 yards and a guy at 312. But the point is, this guy makes plays. He's got 7 touchdowns already. He's just really explosive. He doesn't look like much. He's 5'10", but then he blows by you with ridiculous moves, and you're just like, oh, okay, this guy can play. they're still looking for a real deep over the top threat, and that's something that they've been missing. But on the other hand, they run a lot of rub routes. They run a lot of wheel routes, things of that sort. They've got Jalen Weidemeyer, who's a great tight end, who can go down the middle of the field. And these are areas where LSU has had problems. Plays where there have been some semblance of complexity in routes run, like you take a look at the Traylon Burks touchdown last weekend. It seems like the secondary has really had trouble with that. And I'm sure that that's something that A&M's noticed. Kellen Mond's playing the best football of his career right now. 16 touchdowns, 2 picks, not the same guy you saw last year in Baton Rouge. Better than the guy that you saw at 74-72. He may not be quite as explosive, especially running, but he makes the right decisions. He gets the ball out. He's decisive. He's got a little more zip on his fastball. He's playing the way a senior quarterback should. I think A&M is going to move the ball. It's just a matter of how's the weather. If it rains a lot, that could alter things a little bit. On the other side of the ball, it certainly looked like LSU wants to control the clock. They did a great job of that against Arkansas, who, by the way, correct me if I'm wrong, Jerit, that was the dumbest offensive scheme I've ever seen. When you're down 10 defensive players and you're like, hey, let's go really fast. Even Kevin Sumlin's sitting there going, that may not be a good idea. They really did a nice job controlling the line of scrimmage, running the football. A&M is the number 1 team in the SEC in stopping the run. And I think that if they can put the onus on TJ Finley to beat them through the air, then they're in good shape. So basically the same things that worked in 1980 are going to work in this game. Basically, if you can run the ball and you can stop the other guy from running, you're in good shape.
Yeah, oh no, you're good. It's interesting. You talk about as far as we've come and we're looking at spread offenses in 2020, I keep coming back to the same battle in the trenches, and LSU, while they had some success with it last week against Arkansas, they haven't had as much success this year in those areas as they've liked, and that's really where A&M has set the table all year long. And so it's going to be work cut out for the Tigers as they head out that way, and they're going to have to figure out some kind of way to make A&M struggle in areas that it has had a lot of success thus far this year.
It's really interesting. You look at it, if you took a look at the talent levels on the offensive lines, especially at the start of the year, you would have thought LSU would have had the better of it. Certainly the Aggies, they have an experienced offensive line, but it wasn't a good offensive line. As a matter of fact, it was average to below. Now, all of a sudden, they're great. And, Josh Henson deserves a world of credit. I don't know what he did differently this year, but they've changed a whole lot. And I think that you look at guys like Carson Green and Dan Moore, the tackles, who LSU just ate alive last year. These guys have made themselves into legitimate NFL prospects, and that's something that nobody expected. And I think that LSU fans may be surprised at how good this group is compared to the one that they just absolutely annihilated last year.
With the way that the Aggies have played this year, how does this team stack up to recent teams? We mentioned probably before Jimbo's last couple of years that there were some really good Aggie teams that have probably been the best of the past decade when Johnny Manziel was there, and they're talking about potentially making a run and breaking into the playoffs. Where does this year's group rank in terms of just any recent years?
The only team that holds a candle to them is 2012, really. You take a look at the offensive line that they had that year with 4 first-round draft picks. Actually, one of them didn't even play. Patrick Lewis was a great center. Jarvis Harrison ended up playing in the NFL. That was one of the best offensive lines ever, not just at A&M, but in college football history. But you take a look at sacks, this group has only given up 2, and one of them is questionable. So the argument can be made that this is a comparable group. The running backs are better than 2012. The difference, of course, is Manziel. You're talking about a generational talent. There hasn't been anybody like him, in college football since. I mean, Joey Burrow had a great year last year, better statistically. Not quite the same kind of excitement, lightning in a bottle kind of player. He was just a better surgical passer. And that's not a slap on Joey, because that was a phenomenal year he had. Manziel was just crazy. Somebody said that, most quarterbacks drive up in a Lexus and they're like, "Hey, how you doing?" Johnny drives up in a stolen ice cream truck, skids in over and says, "Get in." That was how it was. But the advantage the 2012 team really had on offense was they had better receivers. Ryan Swope, Mike Evans, Easy Nwachukwu, who I think is still on The Bachelorette. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I have no idea.
Hey, I know he was there. I don't know any more than that. Malcolm Kennedy caught the big touchdown against Alabama in that win. They really had great receivers. This group is okay to good. It's still improving. Somebody like a Devon Demas comes on, then this moves from pretty good to really good. But you're still waiting on that. Mond has been a very good quarterback this year, but he's more of a game manager. Obviously, there is no comparison to Manziel. Defensively, they're probably better. I think that in the front seven, they've got a lot more depth. The difference that they had in 2012 was they added DeMontre Moore, who ended up leading the SEC in sacks, had 20 tackles for loss. It was an obscene season. But they got really lucky that they didn't have any injuries. Spencer Neely and Kirby Ennis played in the middle all year. And if either had gotten hurt, they were toast. On the other hand, A&M can go 3 deep at both tackle positions. They can go 2 deep at least at both end positions. They've got some depth at linebacker they haven't had. The safeties have improved as the season has gone on. They've got a solid group. They don't have a lucky group like they did in 2012. This is a good unit. And I think that's the real difference that this team has as opposed to 2018, certainly last year, is they got depth. They can come at you in waves, which is something that LSU did last year. Alabama always does. They're becoming a real good SEC team, not just an SEC team. And they're able to do what Jimbo wants. So, long story short, for too long, didn't listen. Only 2012 compares to this bunch.
I'm looking forward to seeing how this weekend goes. A&M, obviously, as you mentioned, coming off that break, they're trying to bust themselves into that college football playoff. LSU feels like they're kind of maturing and maybe can have some more consistency than they've had at any point thus far this year, and would love nothing more than to play spoiler to the Aggies. Mark, what do you guys have coming the rest of the week? What are some things that some folks that are looking for more information on the A&M side of this thing should watch out for from AggieYell?
I actually have our offense versus defense matchup up already. It went live last night. LSU's offense against A&M's defense will go up this morning. I'm putting the finishing touches on that. We'll have my Wednesday talking points this afternoon. We're going to talk a lot more about this. Some things that I think A&M may try to attack LSU with that, could potentially work in their favor. Friday, we have our tidbits, which is kind of some inside info. We're going to have a lot of stuff over the next couple of days. Obviously, Thanksgiving will kind of skew the schedule a little bit, but we'll have a lot of info coming into this game because obviously it's a huge one for both teams, and it's exciting to actually have it really matter. 2 years ago it kind of did, but both teams were out essentially of the playoff hunt. Last year it meant a whole lot more to LSU than it did to A&M, and it showed. Maybe this year the roles are reversed, but I think that the opportunity to play spoiler, has to be one that Edo is looking forward to. So the Aggies better come with their guns on, otherwise they're going to be upset again.
There you go. We'll be watching for it. Aggies hosting the Tigers on Saturday. Again, he's Mark Passwaters from AggieYell on the Rivals Network. For TigerDetails.com, Jerit Roser. Thanks.